Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and I hope you are doing well. I wanted to make a video today, as I do pretty much every year at this point, talking about the Music Deep Dive channel, giving some updates on the channel, and kind of talking about what the future looks like. But first of all, with these videos, I also like to just talk a little bit about what the channel is. A lot of times people jumping into this channel probably are not going to have too much context as to what the Music Deep Dive project is, and it can be a little bit confusing looking at the sort of array of videos that are on there and trying to figure out how they all connect to each other. So let me give a little bit of context as far as what the project is and kind of what the goal is. So the Music Deep Dive project started really probably about close to 5 years ago at this point. I was a music student in college at the University of Minnesota, and because of that, I took a lot of different courses about music, about the theory behind music, about the history of music. And one thing that I noticed is the way that music is taught at the collegiate level as an across-the-board thing, not just isolated to my own experience, is flawed. Why is it flawed? Well, there's several different reasons. Obviously, in an academic world, there's more of a focus on what's called Western art music, what you might hear described generally as classical music. And that's all well and good, but that means that if you are studying music history, for instance, your study is going to be focused on Western art music, Western classical music. That leaves out not just entire cultures, but entire genres and entire eras of music, if you think about it properly. In my college experience, we only had one semester to talk about all the different musics from basically any culture that wasn't the West, and specifically Western classical music. That doesn't seem like enough time to hit those topics in any sort of meaningful depth. Additionally, if you wanted to learn about popular music, they offered an elective 2-semester course on the history of rock music. This history of rock music course more or less consists of one semester where you're talking about the blues for about 5 minutes, and then you're getting into the 1950s, Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley and that sort of thing, and going up until 1970, and the second semester covers everything from 1970 onward. I hope you understand from me kind of saying that how this is a flawed and incomplete way of teaching music history. And I think there is so much that can be built upon, that there's so much room for someone to jump in and tell a more compelling and tell a more complete version of that history. I think there's so much space for that, that at some point it kind of felt like, well, if someone has to do it and no one else is jumping at it, I suppose I might as well. Now, music history is a very wide scope, so I decided to narrow it more specifically on the era of sound recording, since that is what is tangible, that's what we have preserved the best, and that still, in its own way, gives so much time to focus on so many interesting developments, both from a musical standpoint, from a genre evolution standpoint, as well as from a cultural standpoint, from a technological standpoint. There's so much that is captured just in that span of time between the late 1870s, when the phonograph is invented, and the gramophone shortly after, all the way until the present day. There's so much just packed within that it feels only natural to focus on that era. Additionally, when you talk about rock music specifically, again, most people generally talk about the 1950s and onwards. The blues might get a passing mention. Maybe if you're lucky, you get a little mention of like Louis Jordan somewhere in there. But the fact is that the popular music industry exists and has existed for a very long time. If you look at even some of the record labels that we have today, you'll find that actually their ancestors, or in some cases, literally the record label itself, in the case of Columbia Records, they have existed since the birth of the recording industry all the way back in the late 1880s. There is so much history, there is so much to talk about, and there's so much foundational knowledge to build upon, so many things that happen to lead you to where rock and roll breaks through in the mid 1950s, and we have this massive cultural moment that it feels like it's ignored on a grander scope. And it's time for someone to set that right. So that's what the Music Deep Dive project is for. Now, how it works and what the goal is overall is that for the last several years, I have essentially been compiling a knowledge base. I would argue that in some ways it counts as research, but I'll talk about why I am trying to separate this from the term of research maybe a little bit down the line. So I've been collecting a knowledge base because, someone fresh out of college is not going to be able to do that subject justice. I knew that I needed time to build my own foundation, not just in music and understanding the development of music, but also in understanding the development of history to that point, understanding the development of different art forms to that point. A lot of why I talk about classic books on the channel is because I firmly believe that in order to understand one form of art from a given era, you have to understand all forms of art in that era. So because of that, I'm trying to educate myself on classic works of literature that in turn will inspire works of music, songs, compositions, records going forward. That's a huge piece. You also have to understand the history. That's why I've been reading a lot of kind of historical works, specifically about the United States. And a huge part of that is because one thing that you can't really escape is that the heart of the recording industry and the bulk of what makes it tick does reside in the United States, and that the record industry itself began in the United States. And you need to understand just where the United States was in the late 1870s in order to understand what allowed for the recording industry to essentially take off in the way that it did and to evolve in the way that it did. So this has been my focus. And at some point I decided to document the books that I was reading on a YouTube channel. One, because I thought people would be interested in it, and two, because it does start to build a little bit of attention and hype for the project. Now, I've been doing that for about 2.5 years now, and as of this recording, I'm pleased to say the channel has grown even a little bit faster than I was expecting it to. We are almost at 750 subscribers as I make this video, which is really exciting. I'm hoping to get to 1,000 by the end of the year. That's kind of a goal I have for 2025. But, we've been doing this for about a little over 2 years now. And once again, I think it's time for me to kind of talk a little bit about where is this going? I've been promising this in some shape or form since 2022, and to people I know in other forms since 2020. What is the end goal of this? Well, the end goal is eventually for there to be some sort of published work of history. At the moment, the idea is for that to be a podcast. Why? Well, for one thing, I think if you were talking about an oral medium, oral as in AURAL, if you're talking about a medium that is produced via sound and is reliant on sound, then it makes sense to have this history told in a sonic format. That is how it adapts to storytelling the best. The other reason is we've seen examples now a few times of other podcasts that have taken music-related subjects and subjects related to music history and really carve out interesting lanes and really cool ideas in the podcast world. And I could be talking about podcasts like Song Exploder, podcasts that talk about like the theory behind songs and things like that. But also talking about just hardcore music history podcasts. Cocaine and Rhinestones, the history of 20th century country music, is one of the best podcasts, maybe the best podcast that I have ever listened to. Super, super compelling, and manages to make a genre that for a lot of people is not something they're inclined to care about that much. He manages to make it very engaging, and the story crafting in those episodes is phenomenal. A History of Rock Music in 500 Songs is another one that has been going strong for a number of years now. And in some ways is maybe treading similar ground to what I'm doing, but I think my focus is broader and is intended to emphasize slightly different things. Actually, in some cases, very different things from what Andrew and his team are doing. It's been proven that podcasts work, and it's proven that there is a niche for this type of thing. And it's also been proven that the niche that I am focusing on, at least to start off, is not something that has been explored. So that's why we're here. Now, I have been talking about podcasts off and on for the better part of a year, give or take. I've been pretty set on that being the main medium. There will be other components. There will be a website. There will be transcripts of episodes for people who are not inclined to listen to podcasts casually because they're too busy listening to music. I totally understand that. But now that I've been talking about it, what does that look like and when will it happen? Well, my reading has been very much organized in a chronological way. So I have been working on a lot of books related to the Civil War era, for instance, as you will see by some of the reviews that I've been doing recently. Because of that, that obviously means we're getting pretty close to the era when the phonograph is going to be invented. The phonograph is invented in 1877. You start seeing the first commercially available wax cylinders coming out in 1888, 1889. So we're really approaching that point. And so this is what ultimately the plan is going to be. We are still going to be doing book reviews on this channel. That is not going away at any point. We are also going to continue doing these other kind of unrelated music videos. So for instance, I've been doing videos on record collections, and I've been doing videos on the my favorite albums of 2024 and discography dives. Those are not ending either. And the reason that you're seeing an uptick in these lately is because ultimately we're now at the point where now I feel closer to being able to actually announce something with the Music Deep Dive project, and I really want to start pushing and promoting this project. And the best way to do that is by creating content that is actually related to music, because no one is going to give a flying fuck about a music-focused channel that only reviews books. It's time to start putting some stuff out there. And people like talking about artist discographies. People like talking about records. They're two fairly low-stress types of videos to make, especially the way that I have learned how to do them. I've created a good system for that. And so that's what I want to keep doing. But I also want to make sure that they're high quality enough and that what I'm bringing to the table is interesting enough to keep people invested. I've seen some really nice comments about some of the discography dives, and I'm genuinely really appreciative and humbled by them. And I want to make sure that that bar of quality is still there and is still kept very high. Now, my focus is, we're at the point where there's still going to be a number of books that I have to read and that I want to read for this project, and that will be reviewed on the channel. But once we get a little bit closer to the 1870s in this chronology here, I'm going to take a step back, and you probably will not see as many active book reviews on the channel, because my focus then is going to be on the true in-depth research part of it. So what do I mean by that? I mean, we're talking more than just reading a book for pleasure during downtime, making mental notes here and there about what might apply for a podcast episode narrative or something like that. We are talking about intense reading, making notes. I have a couple of note-taking programs on my computer that I've been playing around with, one called Obsidian, which is really cool, that I will be building upon over time. And from that is going to come the basis of the actual podcast episodes, the actual podcast scripts and things like that. I already have kind of a roadmap of what I want it to look like. I'm picturing that the first season, if you will, is going to be a lot of building up to the year 1877, getting a lot of kind of different strands of the story built up. And this goes for both Western music. This goes for other cultures that are not in the West, because those are very important to talk about. Technology, historical developments, sociological developments, cultural developments, all this stuff is going to be built up and built to this inflection point, 1877, when Thomas Edison records Mary Had a Little Lamb on his phonograph for the first time. So that's what we're going to be building up to. And that's what I'm going to be spending a lot of time kind of actually researching in the coming months. Now, what I wanted to do briefly here, I know this has taken a lot of time, is just give you a preview of some of the stuff that I will be reading and using as reference material for this project. So I have 3 books over here. The first one that I want to show you is the biggest of the 3. This is Richard Taruskin. This is the first volume of his Oxford History of Western Music. Now, Richard Taruskin is a very well-known historian of music, just passed away a couple years ago, I believe. But Taruskin, this is a 5-volume history, and his focus is very much on Western classical music, and he is aware of that, and he is aware of the limitations of it. He says, in his own words, I don't write about popular music, not because it's not valuable, but just because it's not my area of expertise. I don't really care about it personally, so someone else can do that. And there's no doubt that you have to talk about Western art music, Western classical music as part of this history, but it's only one part of it. Talk about class distinctions, right? This is music that, generally speaking, is for the upper class, the highest realms of society. Eventually, you see classical music kind of trickling down to the middle class, thinking about like the invention of the piano. Once piano started becoming more present in middle-class homes, especially in the 19th century, that changes a lot of things, and that is a huge part of why the earliest recorded music sounds the way that it does. But it's certainly a part of the narrative. And, Taruskin's books, they're very opinionated, so you have to, check them, and you have to balance them with other books that I also own and also will use. But they're certainly gold standard material, and I'm very excited to use them. The other 2 books kind of cover a similar topic, similar topics to each other, but in different ways and from different lenses. This is Dr. Eileen Southern, The Music of Black Americans, A History. I have to talk about, racism. You have to talk about racism in this narrative. And that's not just true for African Americans and Black folks in America. You're talking about Indigenous folks, Native Americans, you're talking about Asian Americans, you're talking about people from all sorts of different cultures. Cultural tensions are a big part of this story because they have to be. And especially at this point in the year 2025, especially on January 20th, the day I'm recording this, it's more important than ever, I think, that we bring these topics to the forefront. This book right here is the foundational work of a lot of kind of musicology connected to Black Americans. And it really is just this massive chronicle of what Black music sounded like when it first came to the Americas in the 17th century, how that evolved over time, how enslaved people kind of developed their own relationships to music that were pertinent to their situation, the development of minstrelsy and that sort of thing, and then how over time, post-Civil War, you start seeing these these Black created genres start to evolve and start to blossom in the latter part of the 19th century and the early 20th century. Foundational work, fundamental work, can't really talk about that side of history without using this. And I think the same is going to be true for this. This is a much more recent book, but this is Black Sound, Making Race and Popular Music in the United States by Dr. Matthew Morrison. This book just came out early last year. This is actually an autographed copy. I bought this online from the Strand bookstore, so really excited to own that. This book more specifically talks about the minstrel tradition and how minstrelsy plays a seismic impact in modern popular music. And this is a theme that is, again, going to be covered at great length in the podcast, in the story. You have to talk about certainly musical theater and all sorts of theatrical performances when talking about this, because of course vaudeville is going to be a huge part of the early recorded American popular music scene. But this book in particular, which I've only skimmed through, the same is true for both of the other 2 actually. I've only skimmed through these so far, but the amount of depth and the amount of strong research that is in here needs to be discussed more. It needs to be highlighted. And if you take anything away from either this video or from the podcast when it eventually comes out, it's to buy these books. Buy these materials yourself, read them, and come to your own conclusions. I don't at any point want to take credit for any research that I have not done myself and that I have not vetted myself. And I want to make sure that people are pointed to the right source materials. And after that people feel encouraged to buy them and to support the writers. So just to make that clear, these are two works that I will absolutely be using. And I want to make sure you understand that to get the most out of the experience, buy them yourselves, read them yourselves. They're well worth it. And I can say that even from the limited exposure that I have to them so far. Okay, I've been rambling for a long time, but to give you a sense of what's going to go on, things will be kind of coming out as they have been, mixture of book reviews and a discography dives. And then at some point, there's probably going to be more of a focus on discography dives and music-related videos for a while. Less book reviews because, again, the books that I'm reading will probably be a lot more labor-intensive, require even more time than some of the other ones. And then we'll go from there. I'm not going to make any promises about a timeline, but I do want to say that I would love to be able to have a firmer answer for a timeline, hopefully by the middle of the year, and potentially even have something tangible and ready to go and announced by the end of the year. That's what I'm going to try to hold myself to. So hopefully, if nothing else, by the end of the year, we'll have a name for this whole thing, we'll have a release date, and we'll have a lot more forward progress than we have been. But with that, I want to thank you all for watching this very long intro video. I hope it was engaging, and I hope people are excited for what's to come. I do think this is going to be a very important process, and this is a very important project and creative work to get right. So it requires a lot of time. It requires that I educate myself on a lot of different things. And I have to do that because that's how you get the most accurate history. That's how you create the best product. That's how you all will get the most out of it. And that will do the most service to the music, to the musicians, and to the writers of these books who paved the way years, if not decades or even centuries before I did. One thing I wanted to add before wrapping up this video here is I do, in fact, have a P.O. box now that you can send things to. Why would you want to send things to me? Who knows? That's kind of up to your discretion. But if you have anything in particular that you think might be of interest or advantageous for me to read or to listen to as part of this project, anything that you'd want to contribute at all, I would be more than happy to take it kind of at your discretion. But if you do want to mail anything over, you can mail it to P.O. Box 120670, and that is in New Brighton, Minnesota 55112. So again, that's P.O. Box 120670, New Brighton, Minnesota 55112. You can mail your stuff there if you have anything at all. And I would be more than happy to take any contribution. Anything that you think might be even peripherally helpful would potentially do me a great service. So no pressure in any way, but if you have something that you think might be of interest, feel free to send it along and I will definitely check it out. Thank you all for watching. Please check out any of the other videos if you have not. I think there's some really cool stuff that you'll probably dig, and more videos are to come, but I will see you all next time. Take care. Stay warm. It's minus 10 degrees out in Minnesota, so I'm going to go over and turn that heater up a couple more degrees. But I'll see you next time right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive.